We have a brief presentation for you. I want to let everybody know we're really happy you're here. Thank you for coming downtown. Thank you for being here with us. My name is Joe Conger. I'm the Public Relations Manager for the city's Transportation Department. I will keep it clean. I will tell no dad jokes. But I will tell you that we do want to listen to you. That's why we're here. This is going to be a collaborative effort. We're going to listen to others. We're going to respect your opinions. Please respect ours, too. We have some.
Can we have your name again?
Joe Conger, Public Relations Manager.
C-O-N-G-E-R?
Yes, ma'am. joe.conger@sanantonio.gov if you want to get a hold of me later. We are here to agree to disagree on certainly many things, talking about our good friend Todd. We want to let you know that you're going to share the airtime with us. We're going to have you actually come and ask questions too after the end of the presentation. You'll get 2 minutes to talk and give us your concerns. If it's something that's going to be something that we really have to delve into a little bit deeper, we're going to take you offsite and make sure that we get that comment answered for you in a timely fashion. So we'd appreciate if you silence your cell phones, give us your time and your respect. Todd's a good friend of ours. He's your community member. He's your tia. He's your abuela. He is your business merchant down the street. He is the future person coming to your community because we expect in the next 25 years to have more than 1 million people coming into San Antonio. Some of them are going to live on your street. Some will live on mine. Some may live along the transit corridors that we are trying to provide in the city. VIA has got the go-ahead. They and the federal government are going full steam ahead. What we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that the development around it suits your needs, your community's needs, and also is able to gather in these folks who are coming in and maybe give them some alternative modes of transportation because that's what the Transportation Department likes to see. Just a caveat, don't treat me like your ex-husband. I get that a lot already. Don't treat the others in the room. Let's give everybody the respect you deserve, right? So we appreciate you being here. I'm going to hand it off to our first speaker, and that is our Transportation Department Director. It's Kat Hernandez. Kat?
Thank you. I'm going to put this one on. All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. Actually, Joe, do you want to hold this one before it rolls off? Yeah. All right.
I'm going to grab these so I can see them.
Yes, all right. So as Joe said, I'm Kat Hernandez. I'm the director for our city's transportation department. And I'm going to provide you a briefing on a lot of the work that we've been doing over the past year to develop what we call a transit-oriented policy framework. It also includes an update to our TOD zoning code, our zoning district, and so we're going to provide a little bit of details related to that as well. I want to take an opportunity to introduce some of the departments that are here and agencies that are here with us today to help answer your questions. In addition to the team members from our transportation department, could you raise your hands? They're here as well. They'll be here afterwards when we talk outside the room, when you're looking at all of the maps, when you're looking at all of the boards. So they'll be there to answer those questions as well. We also have staff members from our Neighborhood Housing Services Department. They'll be available too for questions, and there's some in the back as well. And then we have team members from our Economic Development Department. I don't know where she might be outside already. And then, of course, we have representatives from VIA in case there's any questions related to the construction of the line. All right, so a little bit about what we're going to cover tonight. We're going to do a presentation of our draft transit-oriented policy framework. One of my team members, Murray Myers, will go over that framework, the draft that was presented to City Council last week and is moving through a feedback process over the next 2 months. We're also going to present a draft of the update to the TOD zoning district. I'll provide a few slides to kind of tell you a little bit about that as that is also moving through a feedback process over the next 2 months. Then we'll talk about the next steps and the public meetings that will be occurring over the next 2 months. And then we'll do an audience Q&A with about a hard stop of the Q&A about 7:15 so we can allow a lot of that visit of staff to be able to see the boards, provide us input on the boards, and provide us input on the maps. It's a very important piece about tonight's efforts. So again, hard stop at about 7:15 so we can engage with you guys outside in the lobby on the boards and the maps. All right, so a little bit about TOD, or Transit-Oriented Development in San Antonio. So transit-oriented development really is an opportunity to address rising costs that are related to transportation and housing. It creates those development patterns that encourage density. It encouraged improved access to a range of uses such as jobs, retail, services, and schools as a result of what we call an enhanced transit corridor. So policy changes are needed so that we can enable this to occur while still protecting our established vibrant neighborhoods. And that's very important when you're establishing policy within our city. So the framework and the updated zoning code is the first step in what we have a multi-phased process. The first phase of this process is to adopt the framework and adopt the recommended changes to the zoning code by December. And then the next phase is to take those recommendations in the policy framework and develop them into what we call a strategic So our process to do this started late last year with the creation of what we call a technical working group that's under our Housing Commission, whose charge was to work on those recommendations to update the Unified Development Code so we're supporting housing near transit. Our Removing Barriers subcommittee under the Housing Commission as well does continue their efforts so they can implement the Strategic Housing Implementation Plan with the focus to provide recommendations within our policy framework that address housing affordability and anti-displacement. This was a common theme that we heard during our early engagement efforts. Following the creation of the technical working group, CCR, what we call a council consideration request, was submitted to create a transit-oriented development plan. So in January, our governance committee, which is a small body of the city council, recommended staff move forward with the development of the plan and the creation of the task force so we can make recommendations to update the existing TOD zoning district. And all this work, these three efforts, ultimately culminates with the development of a transit-oriented policy framework. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Murray Myers, who's going to go into the framework.
All right, thank you so much, Kat. So you may be asking, what is a framework? So in 10 words or less, a framework is San Antonio's guide to building transit-oriented communities. So it's basically the blueprint for how transit-oriented development should look along the Green Line and Silver Line. Rather than there be a free-for-all, this is your opportunity to tell the city, agencies, and developers what you would like to see. That can include examples like places you'd like to go, shops or parks. It could include features. So far we've heard a lot from you all about more shade, more green spaces, wider sidewalks. And if you look closer in the framework, there's a full list of recommendations to address issues such as walkability, economic opportunities, and housing affordability. So when you look at a framework and you start to develop the principles, how do you do that when there's a game changer that's never before seen in the city of San Antonio? So what the team did is we went and we reviewed about 8 years of city plans. We went back and we saw, okay, what have neighborhoods been consistently telling us over the past 8 years through all of these plans, whether it's the Economic Development Strategic Framework or the SHIP or SA Tomorrow. And what we found is that we were consistently told that these are key themes or priorities for the communities: resilience, housing affordability, multimodal connectivity, equity, economic opportunity, and health and quality of life. And so what went into these plans, or 8 years of plans, is basically thousands of surveys, hundreds of stakeholders, hundreds of meetings, all distilled into these key areas or principles that we've used for the transit-oriented policy framework. So principles are great, but how do you make them actionable? This was the strategy that the departments developed. So one quick thing to add is we looked at multiple cities' frameworks and transit-oriented development plans. Most of them are developed by a singular department or agencies What we did differently here is we worked with all of our departments. It is probably the first ever framework developed or co-written by 7 departments. So it was a really collaborative effort where each of us met weekly to talk about how do these key themes or principles really look when it comes to implementation. So the principles, as you can see, they were then looked at to develop what are the objectives and then what are some actionable items for each one. So for example, economic opportunity, one of the objectives is to help bolster both new and existing businesses while supporting the retention of small businesses. For health and quality of life, ensure equitable access to vibrant, people-oriented public places. Or for housing affordability, protect and support current residents, especially the most vulnerable. And what you'll see in the framework throughout the objectives and the actions is that equity isn't integrated into each one of these key themes. It's not something separate and a separate part of the framework. It's a part of each one of these principles and actions within. So to go over some examples and kind of describe what each of these mean, when you look at economic opportunity, one objective is to help bolster new and existing businesses and support the retention of small businesses. So a really specific action of that would be provide additional support to small businesses along the ART or ARC corridors. So in this image here, it's an example from Austin. What the action could potentially look like in detail is, let's say there's a public-private partnership, a partnership between the city and the developer. In this situation, the city would dictate the leasing agreements in order to provide affordable ground floor space. So in a situation like that, the city and the developer could decide, okay, a certain percentage of this ground floor space can be dedicated to small businesses. So you can see there's a mix of uses here, there's restaurants, there's other shops. That's just an example of how you go from principle to objective to really specific action. For multimodal connectivity, one key theme that came up was enhance the first and last mile connectivity through coordination and targeted infrastructure improvements. We heard this a lot at the HOA meetings as well. It's great to have this line going through San Pedro, but I want to get somewhere outside of San Pedro. How's the city going to provide better connectivity? So one action within the framework is to perform a walk-shed survey within a half mile of all the transit stations. What that means is the city does an analysis along those bus stops to determine which areas have poor sidewalks, which areas need better pedestrian improvements, mid-block crosswalks. So we would analyze the area and then determine, okay, how do we prioritize infrastructure projects? How do we prioritize bond projects? So that's how you go from principle to objective and then action. Health and quality of life. One objective is to ensure equitable access to vibrant, people-oriented public places. And action within that would be to encourage public gathering spaces around transit stations. So Metro Health, one thing, they recommended multiple things. One thing in particular that they wanted to look at was how do we improve mental health throughout transit-oriented developments. One idea was to make sure that there's better social connectivity and there's opportunities for people to talk, connect, get out, and be more active. So this is one example. For resilience, personally, my favorite, just because I've worked on it quite a bit, one objective and a key theme was ensure public spaces consider heat relief and design with a focus on the most vulnerable populations. So in each city, whether it's San Antonio, Austin, Seattle, each city has limited resources. How do we prioritize those resources? And again, integrating equity within the framework, we would prioritize projects in the most vulnerable communities. So you can see some images down here, how it looks like in other cities. On the left is Pittsburgh. What they've done is they've integrated stormwater management or green spaces near the bus stops. They've provided more shade. On the right is actually a green roof on a bus station. It's another way to provide a cooling benefit as people are waiting for the bus. And of course, the specific action for this principle is explore every opportunity to increase tree canopy coverage along the ART corridors. So housing affordability and livability, we could actually just spend the whole night talking about this one here. So Neighborhood Housing Services has worked closely with the Technical Working Group and their Moving Barriers Subcommittee for over a year on housing toolkits, which you can find in the framework as well. So one of the objectives would be to produce and preserve more affordable housing near rapid transit. Some of the actions would include supporting and providing incentives for housing affordability, increasing density, including for the missing middle housing. And so I know we've talked within the task force and in other meetings, how would this look like? How could you provide more affordable housing? One concept that's been used in multiple cities is land banking, so available property that the city would procure and then set aside a certain percentage for affordable housing. So if you look at this, initially you may think, this is an image from Where's Waldo, but if you look a little closer, what you'll see is an example of each one of the principles. You can see the green spaces, you can see the small shops, you can see the multimodal connectivity, public gathering spaces, all of it here within what could be a transit-oriented community. So the right mix matters. What we want to do is, throughout the night, is hear from you and figure out what's the most important to you. It could be one of the principles, or it could be something really specific, like, hey, I don't care about any of this, I just want to see a shoe store along San Pedro. You do you. We just want to make sure that whatever that opinion is, or whatever your priority is, we want to hear that. So what you'll see on the boards tonight, there's the 5 principles, there's a brief explanation of each one with a couple of questions. So if it's multimodal connectivity, you can see a couple of them. One of them, or the second question, is how would you like to travel to your destinations? It could be bus, it could be car, it could be a hovercraft and a DeLorean, whatever it is, you let us know. That way we can document that. And as we get more feedback, what you'll see is the draft framework will consistently be updated based on what we hear from all of you. And then on the final board, you'll see the 5 principles. And what we really want to know is, out of all these, which ones are the most important to you? So within the framework, we have the 5 principles, we have objectives, and then we have actions. Like I said, there's about 60 actions within the framework. Every city has limited resources. We can't implement them all. We need to prioritize. So this is where your feedback comes in to help the city prioritize what can we potentially fund in each of these categories or principles. So just be prepared to spend a little more time visiting the boards, giving us feedback, work with the facilitators to provide your notes, and we'll look forward to seeing you all out there. And now I'll pass it back to Kat.
All right, as I mentioned earlier, part of this process, part of the framework includes the process that the TOD task force did to look at potential amendments for our current TOD zoning district. So a little bit about our zoning district. So the current TOD zoning district was actually adopted with the original adoption of our Unified Development Code, or our UDC, which was back in 2001. And in over 20 years, it's only been used 3 times. So the current TOD is currently allowed anywhere within a half mile of a bus stop. This means that there are no guardrails limiting it. It's also not context sensitive to neighborhoods. There's no height limitations, no rear setbacks. It's just a great district to use on vacant pieces of property to create what we call like a mixed-use development along a bus line. But this process is only to update the code so it allows options for development while respecting neighborhoods. This process does not rezone any property. So I'm going to make that clear. It does not rezone any property. It means that applicants who want to rezone to the new TOD code will still be required to go through our typical rezoning process. There is still that public hearing process that they'll still have to go through. So why do we need to update the code? As I mentioned earlier, no guardrails, no limitations, no restrictions. But TOD is an opportunity so we can realize those benefits along our dedicated advanced transit corridors. These benefits include compact, livable, walkable neighborhoods, while multimodal transportation access, while strengthening and sustaining our established neighborhoods. So to provide a recommendation on an updated code, the task force was created earlier this year and includes representatives from 13 registered neighborhood associations and council districts and 13 residents representing organizations that are experts in transportation, development, and housing industries, as well as our partner agencies such as VIA, Centro, and our Metropolitan Planning Organization. The task force began meeting in February of this year, and in total, the task force met about 7 times over 8 months. Additionally, the process included the formation of a subcommittee that included 23 members, including some members of the task force, as well as others from different areas of the city. And this subcommittee was asked by the task force to do what we call a deeper dive into the applicability and the language to protect existing residential neighborhoods, especially in the core of our city, which is the original 36 square miles. The subcommittee met 8 times over about 2.5 months to provide a recommendation to the task force to consider. So about almost 50 community members were part of this task force process. And I'm going to go over a couple of amendments that were recommended by the task force. So several amendments include the creation of what we call 3 categories for our transit-oriented development districts. The transition district is basically reserved for residential uses at a maximum of 5 units per site. This allows the mix of housing types so we can address the need for additional housing, and this district typically, God bless you, this district serves as a transition from more intense districts. The mixed-use district category allows for that mix of uses that we talked about, retail, service, office, and residential uses. And this category includes 4 distinct levels of intensity that allow for increased height. The district is to promote compact, walkable, sustainable neighborhoods. And then there's a 3rd category, the hybrid industrial district, and this allows for a mix of light industrial uses and other types of uses with 2 levels of intensity for increased height. And this serves as a transition to the mixed-use districts. So this is a district that you would typically use at intersections of major arterials, major streets, or at highways and the transit corridor. The work that the task force did also includes recommending standards that protect neighborhoods from incompatible development. The code now incorporates standards that currently exist in our Unified Development Code, including height restrictions that ensure height compatibility with abutting single-family homes, as shown on that first graphic that you see on the left. The task force also recommended some unique standards that include characteristics to create pedestrian environments, such as minimum distances between doors along the corridor, and window requirements so we create transparency instead of large amounts of blank walls that you're walking by. And as mentioned previously, the current TOD zoning district allows anyone to request to rezone within a half mile of any bus stop. So that means that any of the properties that you see in orange are eligible to rezone to the current TOD zoning district today. So TOD really should be more specific to corridors that have a high capacity transit component, so you can focus that density and intensity of uses to those corridors where appropriate. The subcommittee and task force tackled this and recommended a process that allows us to create the guardrails for appropriate transit-oriented development applicability. Now we're moving towards this. So this is what you see is how applicability has been narrowed. It's now applicable to only the certain corridors that are identified as ART corridors. So we went from this, and now we're going down to this. So as you can see on the zoomed in slide, is what you saw on the previous slide, is the applicability or eligibility of properties that is only located along those ART corridors. This now puts the T, transit, into TOD, transit-oriented development. So the process that the task force and subcommittee members did to get to this approach started with the draft code that had recommended originally a 1/4 mile applicability from the corridor. But the discussion of the task force increased that view, since really walkability is typically about a half mile, which really represents about a 10-minute walk. A 10-minute walk is really the threshold that we would normally have to walk to the next transit station so we can take the bus and get to our next destination. While a half mile applicability for TOD is appropriate in some areas along the corridor, there are areas in which that would drive it directly into the middle of the neighborhood. So the approach became more customized. expanding it where appropriate, as you can see where it's larger in the areas, and contracting it where we need it to be sensitive, especially where those neighborhoods are directly abutting the San Pedro corridor. So here's what's recommended. This is a zoomed in look at one of the maps that you see out there in the lobby. So it's a process that requires stakeholders from the neighborhoods and businesses to participate in the development of boundaries along those ART corridors only. Through this process, maps are required to illustrate the boundaries that allow property owners to request to rezone to the updated TOD code. As the boundaries are developed, they can be sensitive to the built-out residential neighborhoods, but still allow those opportunities for transit-oriented development in areas such as our regional centers. And as you can see on this map, the boundary recommended in this section kind of expands around the areas of San Pedro and I-35, while it contracts around established neighborhoods going north. So the proposed code starts with the green line. And in this case, the maps decrease the current applicability of a half mile from any bus stop, which basically covers all of the properties along this corridor. So it's now just the properties within the proposed boundary that allows us to protect those neighborhoods on these maps. So as new corridors become ART corridors, such as the potential for the Silver Line, which is the east-west corridor, the process requires the code to be updated, as well as the process to create the boundary maps along that corridor to establish new eligibility areas. So you'll see those maps outside in the lobby, and we want to be sure that we get your feedback as part of this process. So remember, we now have limited where it is currently allowed to be requested and remove the ability for many properties that used to be able to apply for it today, now to only those within the proposed blue boundary. So I want to be sure that you're looking at those maps out there and giving us your input, any concerns, questions that you have. It's very important that you see those maps in the back. Oh, what happened? Let's see, sorry, all right. So additional provisions in the updated code include protections for neighborhoods, such as excluding properties from being able to rezone to TOD, transit-oriented development, that are equal to half an acre or less, that are zoned single-family and have single-family uses of 4 units or more. This exclusion protects our established residential neighborhoods in our urban core. Recently, we went to the Planning Commission Technical Advisory Committee, and their recommendation to Planning Commission was to exclude any single-family zone property with a single-family use, no matter the size, within the original 36 square miles. That's the urban core of the city. Outside of that original 36 square miles would then be the half-acre limitation. So that is a recommendation to Planning Commission that Planning Commission will then consider. Additionally, for properties that are within historic districts or neighborhood conservation districts or other overlays that have those design standards, the code requires that TOD zone properties comply with those overlay district standards. So basically, TOD will tell them how to use it on the inside, but the overlay districts will tell them how it's designed on the outside. So again, it is respective of those neighborhoods that had created the historic districts and the neighborhood conservation districts. So parking provisions, this is another recommendation by the task force. The average cost for incorporating parking spaces within a development range from about $2,000 to $10,000. The Unified Development Code introduced our minimum parking requirements back in 1965, and they have not had an overhaul since. So parking minimums kind of create that inefficient use of land. It makes it difficult to design neighborhoods where it's easy for people to walk and use the public transit to get around. So this can also lead to a form of development called urban sprawl. We know that very well. We're over 500 square miles. That's urban sprawl. Focusing on transit-oriented development and reducing parking minimums also promotes greater social equity in the community. Parking requirements raise rent prices and inhibit the development of affordable housing. Requiring new developments to comply with a 60-year-old code is kind of like requiring new construction of buildings to comply with a 60-year-old building code. There haven't been many updates, and we need to make sure as a city that we make sure that those codes are updated so we reflect the current trends and standards. The proposed amendments that were recommended by the task force recommend a 50% reduction for the residential-only district and no minimum parking requirements for the mixed-use and hybrid industrial districts. I just want to be clear. These are just minimum parking requirements. That does not mean that the development will not provide parking. It's just that we're not requiring them to meet minimum parking requirements that are 60 years old. So typically what goes on nationally is that when those developments go on the ground, the market determines what that use calls for, how many parking spaces do you need, and that's how the development is built. So that's basically what we're advocating for with this. It's a new way to try parking because, again, the city of San Antonio has a 60-year-old parking code. It's a new way to address parking. One of the other things, I'll go over this very quickly, is we have a sign code, chapter 28. And there is a proposed revision to this sign code because there is a requirement in the sign code that actually addresses building setbacks, especially for the front setback. Our proposed TOD code recommends a 0 front setback, so we create that pedestrian environment instead of a sidewalk, large parking lot, and the building all the way in the back. We want to push those buildings towards the front so it creates that walkability. So one of the revisions is to update the sign code that is specifically addressing the San Pedro corridor and remove that 25-foot minimum setback so we don't create a code conflict with the new TOD zoning district. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a phase 2, which is our implementation plan. With this implementation plan, as Murray had said, one of the things that we will be working on is the walk shed analysis to determine where those sidewalk gaps are or other infrastructure improvements are needed in order to create that walkability and that connectivity. We'll also be looking at the creation of an economic development toolkit and an investment plan for those infrastructures. So again, we create that connectivity to our corridors. Additionally, the plan can also identify some station areas with plans to illustrate that right type of density and housing affordability and focus our incentives in those areas. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kristen to kind of talk about our engagement activities.
Thank you, Kat. Well, Kat and Murray kind of set the stage of really where all of our draft documents are to date. And so I want to give you a little bit of insight on how we really came to gather a lot of comments and feedbacks, whether it was through those technical meetings that Kat mentioned, through those task force meetings, through the Removing Barriers subcommittee meetings, or just general other subcommittee meetings. I see a lot of familiar faces in this room, so a lot of you all were able to kind of provide input and shape what the state these drafts are in to date. So collectively, we had over 90 touch points with the community throughout the last year. So a lot of that really ramping up in June as we started to see a lot of momentum with those task force meetings. We had a survey, we had also community newsletters that were out and available to the public. We also have a website that has been updated to really contain all of our draft information throughout the progress of our project so far. And so far we have seen over 25,000 visits to that website. We are going to continue putting material on there to keep you all informed. So whether that is from today to December, but also throughout the implementation phase of our project. So I want to talk to you a little bit about some of our community events that we've had. So within the community, again, in addition to a lot of those technical committee meetings that we had a lot of focus group meetings as well with various stakeholders and organizations in the community. We also went out into the community at pop-up events. So working in tandem with a lot of our community partners or a lot of our departments within the city and VIA. We also had our consultant team that was out there doing bus ride-alongs and also attending local community events and farmers markets to really get input from the community, whether it's on our survey or just generally, what do you want to see, what does your dream transit-oriented street look like? So we try to get as much input really from the K2 Gray community members in San Antonio. And so through our survey, what we were able to find out, we actually had over 1,000 participants in the community respond and provide input, again, shaping what this draft looks like. We were able to find out a little bit of some of your priorities through this process, and looking at, 33% of the community members just along the green line, which is this this corridor that we're focusing on with the running from running from the airport all the way to Steves Avenue. 33% wanted connectivity represented in this framework and in this code update, and 31% wanted walkability. So again, that started to shape a lot of the principles that Murray was talking about earlier when we looked at our multimodal connectivity, when we looked at resilience, when we looked at a lot of these aspects. And then of course 18% of the community were focused on housing affordability within the green line. So again, really shaping a lot of the input and information with even our housing affordability and livability principle. So as I mentioned, we've had a lot of events so far throughout this project, but it's not going to end with this community meeting. We have another community meeting next Saturday on November 2nd. That will be at Woodlawn Lake Gym from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. And then we also have a community forum at Blessed Sacrament Catholic School from 6 to 8 p.m. on November 7th. And that is hosted by our District 1 Council office. So these are a few of the upcoming community engagement touch points. But we have a lot of public meetings and hearings in addition to that. So again, this is not the end of the journey for us, and we have a lot going on until December. So we would invite you all to attend some of these briefings. A lot of these meetings are public, do have public input and do have space for public participation. So we would invite you to attend, especially as our zoning commission is considering our code updates. Other commissions are considering our policy framework. And then of course, city council consideration on December 19th. But even beyond this, this is really the adoption of the code update that Kat and Murray were talking about and our policy framework, but there is implementation work, as Kat just mentioned, in our phase 2 that will be living past this schedule that you see in front of you. So right now I want to pass it back to Joe so he can open it up to any questions that we may have.
Yeah, we're going to take questions for about 30 minutes here, shorter time if we have to, a little bit longer if we need to. We also ask you that after we do some of this question and answer, we want you to go back out to those boards, right? Look at the questions and give us some real good input. We've had some great input so far on our SA Speak Up page, getting some really incredible information from you guys, and we appreciate that. So I think what we're doing is we're lining folks up here, and I believe I'm going to be playing karaoke mic with you. Do you have a question? I'll try to, or I can try to come to you as well, but I'll be running through. Let's line it up then, because I think I want to make it as simple as we can. Hey, how are you?
Great. My name is Ray Carlos. I live at 314 Donners Drive. I went to that planning meeting. What was it called? The
Planning Commission Technical Advisory Committee.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I didn't have very much insight into a lot of this stuff. That was the first time I was really getting involved with that. I have a lot of concerns, especially with things that were being brought up and things that were happening, because there was issues that I believe one of the committee members, Bianca, was talking about, and she was asking about things that are kind of like related to like issues that are going on in my neighborhood. And like I really didn't appreciate the way they were kind of like the response towards her. And what they did, in my opinion, was they said, let's kick the can to somebody else, because that's somebody else's responsibility. And basically what happened was, she was talking about parking for the current residents there. And one of the things that's going on in my neighborhood right now is that some of my neighbors are parking places and they're getting tickets because there's no parking in that big old situation. The biggest concern I have with that is when we apply that and we kick the can down the road, now it's somebody else's responsibility. The problem that I have is that I've created work orders, right? So with the 311 request, work order number 101-988-6400. Second work order was 101-988-6401. I spoke to, I've also, what happened was they ended up, it was assigned to Public Works, and they closed out the ticket without actually responding to anything, which is really frustrating to me for both of those tickets. Then I sent a follow-up email to Kathleen Bucklew and Elena Banda, and I still haven't received a single response back. With things like that, what I don't like about kicking the can down the road is, especially in this area, the biggest problem that I see is the convergence of 281 North, 281 South, 410 West, San Pedro, and Blanco, all into one lane, right? And what I also didn't like during that subcommittee, or that meeting, is they asked to send it to a subcommittee. And if they would have sent it to a subcommittee, maybe have a different pair of eyes on this stuff, so that they don't see, so that somebody can hopefully catch something like that major mistake that they did, where that's one lane, all converting, all those things. So my big concern and my question is, how do we get this stuff addressed, especially if, as a regular resident, I'm trying to follow the process the right way, but I feel like I'm getting pushback and ignored and all sorts of different things. Thank you.
Sure. We can address probably offline your current work orders or the specific work orders, but in general, I just want to say one of the things that the Planning Commission Technical Advisory Committee recommended was for the neighborhoods that currently experience parking pressures, it was recommending to the Planning Commission looking at, for when properties are zoned TOD in certain neighborhoods, especially if they have those parking pressures, looking at the residential permit program and exploring that for that neighborhood, especially when a property is rezoned to TOD. So should the TOD code adopt the recommended parking provisions as recommended by the task force, then hopefully what it would do is require that neighborhood, as a result of a property being rezoned to TOD, to look at a residential parking program to help address that.
We have done that, and I've actually brought up all that stuff, because like I said, when I dig into an issue, I dig deep, and that's the problem that I have, is that it's kind of difficult, but I understand the frustration on my part is, I don't want to kick the can down the road. I want to address stuff, because if not, it never gets addressed in my opinion.
Right, you're exactly right. And I think that the other missing piece is that there currently isn't a good transit line today to provide that option for riders to use that instead of bringing their vehicle down to that area. So that's one thing that's missing.
Hi, Jack.
Hello. Hello, my name is Jack Finger, and I don't know if any of you saw last Sunday's front page article about how, quote, neighborhoods not yet on board with the proposed rapid transit line. You may want to take a close look at that article. Why? Because the various neighborhoods know that this is a massive land grab, a massive power grab. They know that if you establish exclusive bus lanes up and down San Pedro, along Commerce Street, Fredericksburg Road, etc., are you going to assume that motors are going to automatically stop traveling in that lane? Because if they do, you're going to cause massive traffic jams. And so how do the motorists avoid traffic jams? You think they're going to all of a sudden avoid going that lane that they had earlier to drive in? I mean, who's going to stop them from driving in there? The honor system? Also, the neighborhoods know that VIA is getting into the housing business. What if the residents along up past Hildebrand, north of Hildebrand, don't want to be in a zoning process? You say there's not going to be a zoning process, but you say there's also going to be required registration for those people there. Well, then, excuse me, that's a prelude to zoning, the zoning process. You think that, and also another question, there's only about 20 some odd bus stops from downtown to Newport 10 or further for this system, whereas you have multiple bus stops already for lines 3 and 4, the regular bus routes. What's going to happen to those routes? Are they going to remain on San Pedro or not when this thing gets established?
Thank you. There's no registration process, but I'm not sure if there's anything that
on the screen.
It's not a registration process for properties to rezone. You just, if you want to rezone, you just request to rezone through the normal process. But If there's any other questions related to VIA, we can meet with them afterwards.
Hey, good evening, Kat. As you know, I have multiple concerns with this process, as well as your lack of transparency with multiple neighborhoods. There's a lot of gaslighting that is occurring from the Transportation Department. First and foremost, with the statement that all the residents that would be impacted by the new maps, that they were contacted and that they were invited to participate in the map drawing session. And you claim that email was sent out back in April. I now know that the maps were first presented to the subcommittee on August 12th. And there was a lot of discussion in there from the good neighborhood advocates telling you these other neighborhoods that are going to be impacted need to be a part of the process. I was quite alarmed that you lied in my face when you said you sent out notice to our neighborhood about the map drawing. You didn't even know the name of our neighborhood during that particular meeting. How could you send out a notice to us if you didn't know who we were? Second, it appears now we hear Murray talking about that there's going to be feasibility studies for the walk shed to determine what infrastructure exists and what doesn't, and what type of funding allocations need to be set aside, whether through the regular budget process or via bond. Why wasn't a feasibility study done before a bunch of individuals, quote unquote, transportation and planning experts, decided to include our neighborhood in the walk shed, where we will not be able to access the Green Line? McCullough Street Bridge is closing down. You haven't addressed that, and you also have not answered my email. If you, other individuals from transportation, will come and walk the line with us, and I also want to know about the displacement that the developers are talking about should TOD be implemented.
So I think there's a couple questions I can answer. Yes, so I got your email probably about an hour before we got here. So yes, we will be responding to you, letting you know that yes, we're going to be doing a walk shed analysis along the Green Line. And we can be more than happy to let you know when we do get out there as part of phase 2, we can work with your neighborhood so we can do a walk shed with you. The other point, the last point was?
Developers talking about displacement.
So part of the framework that is online talks about, and I think Sarah, if you want to come up here from Neighborhood Housing Services Department. So again, as I mentioned earlier, our Removing Barriers subcommittee worked hard on coming up with some recommendations related to anti-displacement. So Sarah, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Kat. So displacement's probably the top concern that we've heard in all of these meetings, and I think that that's a really understandable thing when we're talking about new infrastructure and new development coming into communities. I can tell you that the conversations that we've had within Removing Barriers and within the task force have not been at all about redevelopment and more about how do we preserve neighborhoods that are built out and in places where there are currently lots of parking lots, underutilized land, like around the mall. How can we use those areas to put in new affordable housing? Again, none of this is outside of processes from the market, right? So people need to be willing participants, willing buyers, willing sellers. It's not us trying to take away any properties from anyone. And I think if you talk to us at the Board on Housing and Livability, we're happy to walk you through a little bit more of the framework plan of what goes into that. But just know it's a concern that we've heard a lot of, and one that the Removing Barriers Task Force and the Technical Working Group really centered in their work.
Yeah.
This morning asked me if you guys don't want to stand, if you have some issues, don't give up. You won't give up your place, but if you want to sit down, we'll remember where you're at. We'll do that. So don't feel bad about it.
Kat, on the Planning Commission briefing, Zoning are those happening at the regular meeting, or are those happening at the work session prior to the meeting?
For Planning Commission and Zoning Commission, their work session is prior to the regular meeting. Board of Adjustment, they don't typically have a work session, so it will happen at the regular meeting. Historic and Design Review Commission, I'm not sure where exactly it would happen on their agenda, but they're just briefings.
And the work session for Planning Commission and Zoning Commission, those are open to the public, are they not?
Yes, the work sessions are open to the public.
But they're open to
Yes,
the
exactly,
public.
but they don't have public comment during their
No.
briefings.
But they're open, okay. And then just a suggestion, when the city's doing their walk shed stuff, they may want to try to coordinate that with some of the neighborhoods, you know, so
Absolutely.
that we get some partnership.
Yes,
going on.
exactly.
All right.
I see that you're volunteering, right, Cosima?
Thank you for all the work that you've done, and I think, you know, your heart's in the right place. We all want sensible solutions to housing and traffic. I've got two quick questions. One, I want to fact check or make sure I fully understand the projections for increased ridership along the Green Line versus where it is today.
Sure. You have a representative, Sophia.
Pretty simple
Sure.
answer, hopefully.
Yeah, currently we have about 4,500 riders a day on the San Pedro corridor, on the proposed Green Line corridor, based on, you know, census tracts and people moving, and then, of course, some increased usership. We're looking at about 2028, about 8,000 riders a day.
Okay, so 45,000 to...
No, 4,500 riders a day.
Okay, 4,500.
That would go up to 8,000 riders a day.
Well, that's interesting. I would have guessed that we're 4,500 a day based on riding the bus. Okay, another simple question. There are many very small businesses up and down San Pedro, as we can see, probably employing 1 to 5 people. Have the property owners and those business owners been notified of the impact of the street work and closures and the time frame?
The construction.
Yeah.
Have they been notified of that? Because that has impacted a lot of people in this city in recent years.
Yeah, there's a little over 750 individual businesses all along the corridor once you start up on Isom all the way to Steves Avenue. We've stopped into every one of them, had multiple conversations with them multiple times, so we do a direct daily outreach to all the businesses. You know, those that would potentially have a small sliver of land acquisition for a station, you know, there's no taking of an entire piece of property. There's no taking of residential property. It's all confined to our stop areas. And so we're in negotiations with those. You know, they average, you know, 1 to 3 feet.
Okay. Well, one very quick comment on that. I happen to know one of the largest landowners, and whose property has been mentioned in these recent meetings is going to require some taking, and asked if he had been made aware of the Green Line process. He doesn't live in San Antonio, and this is the first he'd ever heard of it. So I just wonder if all these people really understand, with limited resources to fall back on, you know, what's going to happen when their access to their business is impeded.
Well, any acquisition process is been sent out through certified mail. But 46% of the line is center running lane, so there's not going to be a station on the side of the road. So if they're in that area, all they're going to see is increased sidewalk access. That's all the construction that'll be in front of those businesses. Sure.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for the presentation. I have a couple of clarifying comments based on what transpired at the Planning Commission Technical Advisory Committee. I am that FEOM that made that recommendation for the RPP permit, residential parking permit program to be evaluated. Because while our transportation code for parking hasn't been updated in the BBC since the 1960s, there has been ITZ zoning that has been into effect, and it's been updated too, which negated the parking requirement, negated the requirement to do a traffic analysis, and that's essentially going to be morphed or duplicated into the TOD policy that's being presented. And I think that the parking is a true issue, because when you go out and look at the maps, folks, and you look at the light purple, all the light purple properties are the ITZ zone properties, and those are only available inside Loop 410. And so while some areas may have Walmarts and parking lots, there's no Walmart in the original 36 square miles of the city. I think that's important to note. And the gentleman before me made a very good comment about notification of property owners. And I would ask if you could explain how all the properties that are within the boundaries being recommended to be part of this overlay are being notified. What's that notification process look like? And if you are a property owner and you're within those boundaries for a TOD overlay, how do you opt out? Because this isn't a mandatory requirement that the city's going to put you in. So how do you opt out? Number three, if you go back to the adoption slide page, what we learned at PTAC was that the maps were part of the agendized item, but yet the city attorney directed our committee that we could not discuss the maps. And so therefore we weren't able to discuss any of the public comment that was made on those maps. And I think personally that's disingenuous. Please explain what will be available for the public to comment on, and specifically when they can comment, because they can't comment during these briefings. And those briefings that occur, I think there needs to be a little bit more detail that tells them that it's in the Tobin room, it's not in the main room, for certain briefings that occur, and when public comment will be allowed, and what are the topics that will be allowed to be discussed, whether it's the map or just the policy. I just think we need to be as clear as possible. Thank you.
Okay, let's start with her first question. So we'll talk about the notice. So there's two. His question related to notification related to the construction that VIA is doing. So that's a separate process. What we did in order to let people know what's going on in the proposed framework as well as the proposed update to the zoning code is we mailed out over 10,700 letters to property owners within a half mile of the San Pedro corridor, letting them know that this process is going on. It should have hopefully actually went in the mail about 2 weeks ago, and so it should have been arriving as of last week. So that was one thing that we did, notifying people of the 2 community meetings as well as our SA Speak Up site where all of those hearings are. So the other question about opt-out. So remember, right now, the way TOD is currently applied is that any of these properties in yellow currently have the ability to request to rezone to TOD. So right now, let's say there's 100 zoning districts in our Unified Development Code. You have access to 100 zoning districts today. Tomorrow, many of those properties, if this is adopted, will now only have access to 99 because now they were going to remove the ability for them to rezone to TOD. So that's what this process is that we are removing a lot of that area in yellow to now be this small. So again, these properties within this new yellow line just keep and maintain their current ability to those 100 zoning districts. It does not require them to use the TOD code or to use a C2 code or to use an IDZ code. It just means you still have the ability, should you want it ever in the future, or if you sell your property in the future. That's all this means. So we're not applying anything today. We're removing the ability for a lot of properties to have it tomorrow. So that's what this process is. If you have concerns about it being applicable to a property next to you and you're concerned about what that looks like, again, that property owner still has to go through a rezoning process to determine if they can even get TOD. And you will be notified if you're within 200 feet of a rezoning, because this process does not change the rezoning process. So a little bit about the briefings. So there is, without getting too much of a lawyer's hat on, there are certain things that a planning commission has purview over, and there are certain things that zoning commission has purview over. Planning commission does not have purview over zoning. They have purview over land use, but they also have purview over policy, and they have purview over the Unified Development Code and the words that go into the code. So out of that planning commission is a subcommittee which is the technical advisory committee that looks at the code itself and provides a recommendation to planning commission because they are a subcommittee of planning commission. So planning commission will take a look at the code itself to determine is the process the way it's written in the code to create the maps, an appropriate process. Is the process to establish standards in a zoning district, the right kind of standards that we see. Those are the things that they look at. Zoning Commission is also looking at the code because it's a zoning district, but they will have the ability to provide a recommendation on those boundary maps. They may say, well, why did we miss the opportunity to capture a little bit more and allow some more areas to continue to have that applicability? Why did we miss that opportunity? They'll probably ask questions about that. And then they'll provide a recommendation on what they think the boundaries look like. That's why it's important throughout this process, especially with the 2 community meetings, as well as any meeting that people want us to go to neighborhood association meeting. I just had 3 last week. We'll go to those so we can continue to provide a briefing on this, a presentation, and give feedback and input. So we can then give that feedback and input to Zoning Commission. And I already have been making a list. I've heard from 2 neighborhoods, including Crown Hill as well as Almost Park Terrace. Monte Vista Terrace, right? Thank you. And we'll be making some recommendations on some adjustments to those boundaries. But it's important that I hear that feedback from you related to those maps. So briefings, as I mentioned earlier, are just briefings. Those are not actions that that boards and commissions are taking. Those are just briefings. The rest of the meetings, where it says consideration, that's where they're making that recommendation. Planning Commission, Zoning Commission are recommending bodies to City Council. City Council is the final decision. The Housing Commission will consider the framework because they don't have any zoning authority. They don't have authority over the Unified Development Code. So they'll provide a recommendation into the framework. And our SA Speak Up site will have all of the details about the meetings, the time, the spaces, so you can be able to look at that on our SA Speak Up site.
I'm sorry, I'm anxious to
I know, I can see, I'm sorry, I was trying to get through it fast.
I apologize, I missed the first part of the meeting. You may have already addressed this, and excuse my voice. I am changing medications and I'm getting real weepy. But trees are the only thing that's going to improve the walkability, the rideability, etc. If you haven't already decided to plant a tree, or 2 or 3, if you haven't, okay, thank you. If you haven't already decided to plant a tree, or 2 or 3, at every bus stop now, because the best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago, and the next best time is right now. So that is what ought to be happening now, immediately. And I am not going to, as far as, what it's going to do to traffic, whatever. I think you'll work that out, and I really do appreciate the complexity of the process with the city, the imagination of the city staff in working this up. And years ago, I was a reporter for Channel 5 at the City Hall, and I covered exactly these kinds of issues. I also know, unfortunately, a lot of things in the city can be development driven. I appreciate the need to increase the rideability and the access to public transportation very seriously. But, I'd be salivating if I were a property owner or was able to buy property. The other thing is, all along that corridor are opportunities for planting trees today that need to be addressed. All those parking lots that front on San Pedro are ripe for tree planting. If you planted trees along the outer edge of those parking lots and not in the, excuse me, I'm going to finish this. If you gave those property owners tax incentives to convert their parking lots, those parking spaces that abut the sidewalks, or if you went ahead and used the power of eminent domain to get those parking spaces put into trees, you would go a long way to creating a fabulous city and walkability and higher ridership. Thank you.
I'll let Murray talk a little bit about the trees, but just 2 quick points. What you mentioned was the developers salivating. It's exactly why we want to be sure that we're updating the code, because as I mentioned earlier, there's not a lot of limitations, there's not a lot of restrictions on the current TOD code today, and that is available for use today. Secondly, you said you worked for KENS 5 as a reporter. Joe Conger used to work for KENS 5 as a reporter. And then lastly, Murray's going to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing with trees and a partnership that we have with VIA related to that.
Yeah, so thanks for the comment and question. Love it. All the stakeholders and departments that have worked on the draft framework agree 100%. So really quickly for the design, I won't speak too much about the design of San Pedro, but what I can tell you is VIA coordinated with the Parks and Recreation Department to utilize the tree mitigation fund for I think about 100 to 200 trees. The tree species, if there's any plant nerds in here, they're looking at using Texas natives, native trees that would adapt to hotter temperatures in San Antonio. So those are planned all throughout the San Pedro corridor. But yeah, throughout the different objectives or the different the categories, the principles, we're trying to determine how is it possible to plant a tree in every square foot possible. So any opportunity where we can plant a tree, that's what we're looking at, and that's what we'll be using city resources for. So the design, I think I would pass that to VIA in terms of the tree planting. But for phase 2, that's what we're looking at. How do we utilize city resources to plant more trees?
How about air-conditioned bus stops?
Well, so our construction timeline is set to, we're going to start utilities. We're already doing some boring right now just to see where the utilities are. We're officially going to start construction mid next year and late 2027. So the tree planting will be within there at the same time. But Patty, great question, because with the frequency of 10 minutes or less, they won't have to wait at the bus stop very long. So that negates the issue of a long wait sitting out in the hot sun for a long time.
Walking to the bus stop.
Mm-hmm.
Walking to the bus stop needs to be cool.
Okay.
Treeway.
Right, so that'll be part of our construction process.
Hi, I am a developer, and I'm not salivating. I'm a property owner along San Pedro, and yes, I did receive a notice, and my property is subject to a taking. And I think it's kind of a fait accompli, and I recognize the importance of great public transit. But I've notified my tenants, and my tenants have been through hell in the last 5 years. They've been through COVID, they're in a weak economy, and now, they're asking me what's going to happen when construction starts, how are their business going to be protected. And so I implore you that as part of this program, because their losses are not compensable losses in a taking. And somehow or another we need to take care of these small businesses, which is a stated goal of the program. So we can't forget them. The next issue is I do travel a lot in my business, and in the last several months, I've ridden the New York City subway, I've ridden the Bay Area Rapid Transit, I've ridden the light rail in Denver. The success of this program has increased ridership. And the conditions that I'm seeing in public transportation is deplorable. It's not safe, it's not clean, and unless your plan incorporates some type of program for safety and ridership, because the first users, the first people to use these systems, it's going to be underserved communities, people who don't have the money for cars and things like that, people who are trying to get to work. It's going to be the elderly. They need safety, they need security, they need cleanliness, and unless your plan incorporates that, it's going to have a much harder time getting off the ground. Finally, last question, where can I go to learn more about this whole rezoning thing?
Well, there is no rezoning of any properties. That's not happening.
But you said that there was a TD, you could opt to get into the TOD rezone, and so I'm wondering what the TOD rezone is.
Oh, no, so what I'm saying is that a property owner like yourself, you could choose to rezone your property to anything today, and you can still choose to rezone your property to anything tomorrow. So if your property still remains In other words, if you have it today, you most likely have it today because it's all over this area, the current ability to rezone. If your property remains in that blue boundary, you can then request to rezone to TOD if you want to. You go through a rezoning process.
What is the TOD rezone? What is it?
So a transit-oriented district is a zoning district. So like your property's probably zoned C2. Do you know that?
But I understand what a zoning district is, but
That's TOD.
how does the new zoning district impact my ability to use? In other words, I can keep my existing zoning.
Yes.
Use it like I've always been using it.
Yes.
But what would be the incentive to rezone?
So let's say you have C2 today, you do not have the ability to do a mix of uses if you wanted to do a mix of uses.
I see.
It depends on the types of uses that you
So it
want.
changes height restrictions and things like that?
A little bit, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, a couple of good questions. So you said up and down the corridor, you have 4,500 bus riders right now.
Yes.
Okay, and you think that your projection is about 8,000, which is about double. When? In 5 years, 10 years?
Around 2028, shortly after we're finished with construction.
Okay, let me ask you a question. The buses that run right now, what percentage are they full at the moment? Are they 10% full, 25% full? How many people are on a bus at any given time?
Well, so all transportation, including roadways, is built for its high usage mark. For example, take 1604, the construction that's going on there right now. They're not building it for 7 a.m. on Sunday morning. They're building it for 8 to 8 a.m. to 10 a.m.
How full is your bus?
So we have 4,500 people who travel the corridor at any given time during the day. Predominantly, they travel during rush hour in the morning and rush hour in the evening. So if you pass a bus or a bus stop at 2:30 in the afternoon on a Thursday, you may not see anybody there. We built it for the high usage marks of rush hour and in morning and evening.
Okay, so you didn't really answer my question. What I'm asking is, how full is a bus at 7 in the morning? Or is it 100% full?
We border on 100% full during rush hour times in order to get 4,500 people around the corridor. Not everyone starts at the beginning and ends, so
I'm looking for a general answer, because my point is if it's only going to double, then why don't you just run an extra bus? Why do we have to go through all of this proposal?
And
thank you very much. And my next question is, from about right here just north of the library, all the way up until San Pedro hits 281, it's either 2 or 3 lanes all the way. Are we going to lose any of that?
There are going to be bus priority lanes, which will mean that they're
We're going down from 2 to 1.
They're priority for buses.
Okay. No. I'm vehemently going to be against that. We have too much construction and we have too much restriction of traffic in this city right now. And if you're only going to do it because you're just going to double, or you think you're going to double, your bus ridership in 5 years, just run an extra bus, okay? Because that's what that tells me. If a bus runs every 20 minutes, run it every 10 minutes. Why do we have to restrict lanes? We have too much road construction in this town right now. How many people have been on a bus in the last week? Okay. So you ride it every day? That's my time?
Yeah, 2 minutes is up. It's active. Thank you.
No, don't take any lanes away from traffic. That is worse than anything else. Okay? Too much construction in this town already.
I'm in Monica Harris.
Margo.
It's Margo. And I have 4 issues. First off, I want to thank everyone because I lived in Boston, New York, and I was in Dallas when they made their rapid transit. And it's important, and I want it. But I have some issues. The first is parking. I think it is foolish if you think a mixed-use apartment building does not need parking spaces for all the residents. We just had an issue right on my corner where there's been several accidents, several deaths. I walk my dogs. It's the intersection of Hildebrand and McCullough. Hildebrand and Howard, and there was a fourplex that got rezoned to allow, and they were required to have parking in the back. And we also asked the city to make that half block no parking on Howard because you would turn the corner from Hildebrand and you couldn't see, and that contributed to accidents. So please reconsider. Every apartment has 2 people living in it, both of them usually have cars. You are making a corridor north and south, but people want to go to different places in San Antonio. They're going to have a car like they have in New York City, and they have in Boston, so you have to have some parking spaces. The second thing is the traffic issue. We have San Pedro from Bassi down to Hildebrand is only 2 lanes each way, and if you make one of them a dedicated bus lane, that's going to divert traffic down Howard, which is already a horrific mess of people speeding through Monte Vista and Monte Vista Terrace. And I'm frightened because we have dogs, we walk dogs, everyone's walking dogs, and this should be a walkable neighborhood. And so you're going to have to prevent or figure out how to prevent that diversion of traffic down a small street. My third issue is the setbacks. I hope that when you set the setbacks, we're going to have wider sidewalks like we do in big cities where it's safe to walk and I'm not going to be jumped on the curb from a car. And lastly, I'm going to tell you that my husband is disabled. We bought our duplex in Monte Vista Terrace in 2015. Our property taxes have doubled. This is now no longer an affordable place. And if the property values continue to go up because of it being close to transit, we're going to have to find a new place to live. So please consider all of the people who live here for their affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Kat.
Hi.
So, as part of the process during the subcommittee, we did have instances where property owners were able to send emails or call and opt out while we were still going through the mapping process. I understand that there were property owners that were still submitting up until the day that the maps were finalized. But I don't think we ever really clarified what the opt-out process was because some property owners successfully removed their properties, but others did not. I know the overall area that is eligible for TOD is decreasing, but can you please explain what the specific opt-out procedure or process is for property owners that do not want to be a part of the special district? And my second question is actually for Via. With the understanding that you're looking at doubling ridership over the next few years, the fact that the city has reduced the amount of funding that it is giving you, I've taken a look at the budget that you released a couple weeks ago, and I noticed that in coming years you really weren't allocating much more for security. So how are you going to leverage some of the funding that you're getting from the federal government, knowing that you're spending a lot on the transit stations, to make sure that safety and security is addressed while you're doing all of this, knowing that there's less money coming from the city? I know you're looking at a new tax or re-implementing a tax that currently isn't in use, but that's, I don't know that that's actually passed. What beyond the new tax are you planning to use to do all of this?
I'll touch on the opt-out, and then you can talk about the sales tax too. So yes, there were a couple of, as we were going through the map development, there were a couple of properties that, like Conservation Society had a couple of historic properties that were on the periphery of the boundary, and so those were removed through that process. There were a couple of emails from property owners that had erroneously thought that they were in the blue boundary and they were not, so we confirmed that and said you weren't in the blue boundary anyway. They were several blocks away. There were a couple, probably about 2 or 3, that had also provided their feedback and input into the being in the blue boundary, and we have that list. So what we're doing is, if you are within still the blue boundary, keeping your ability to rezone from today and tomorrow, and you don't want to be in that blue boundary anymore, then just email us and let us know. We're keeping a running list of those properties, because at the zoning commission, we'll make that recommendation, because we need to make sure that we assess where those properties are. So if we have sort of like a block that creates a Swiss cheese effect, then we need to make a recommendation to zoning commission to determine, do we just remove that whole block out of it, or do we let the zoning commission determine whether or not just to maintain a straight line? And again, nobody's forced to rezone today, nobody's forced to rezone tomorrow. So all of that input and feedback will be gathered, and then that recommendation will be provided to zoning commission. So I'll pass it over to Tom.
Sure. As part of the construction for the plan, well, first of all, our VIA has its own police department. We have our VIA Transit Police. They're all licensed peace officers in the state of Texas and TCOL certified. And we do have magistration rights with the district attorney's office, so we can deliver people to the jail to get magistration. With that, as part of every one of our transit centers, so like North Star Transit Center, our bus operations center on San Pedro, just south of Ashby, all of those are transit police substations. Every single one of the stations on the Green Line is going to have a blue phone directly to police department if there's anything that's happening at that station. Also, with the 10-minute frequency, we're going to have eyes on every station every 10 minutes because there will be a driver at that station. All the design is going to be to not create a sleepable situation or even a situation to lay down. Those transit stations are there for people accessing transit. So the drivers will be able to see those folks every 10 minutes. If someone has missed 2 buses, they're going to be removed. So everything is designed around the protection and insulation of our riders so that they can access our system and get where they need to go safely.
So you mentioned about the budget allocation that the city provides to VIA. So yes, as that is being decreased, Tom, you can talk about it, but in 2023, we did an interlocal agreement with VIA related to the sales tax as a result of the vote that occurred in 2020. So in 2026 is when they get the full share of what the voters said that they could get, and that's why our money is, the budget allocation is decreasing because their use of the sales tax is increasing. Do you want to add anything? Okay, that's it?
So all of those safety features will be incorporated into the funding that we have, both through the federal government and the sales tax.
You guys will be our last 2 questions. Thank you.
So I've attended several of these meetings and all the studies that have been done, traffic studies, this study, that study. Has any study been done as to how many people are going to be displaced in the future because of this? Because like Margot hit on, all of us in this room have seen our property values go up, market rate. And as this happens, along that corridor, all those people that are living there renting or owning, the market rate is going to push them out. And you can say that you're going to be putting affordable housing units in there, but what's happening is affordable is not good enough. People are going to be pushed into public housing because we can't stand the market rate. So this is going to cause huge displacement, not just of people living there, but also the businesses, because nobody can afford, market rate places.
I want to have Sarah answer that because that's what the Removing Barriers Subcommittee focused on.
Thanks for that question. As part of my job, our team runs a property tax help campaign, so we hear a lot, especially during the active protest season, about how people's property tax bills have been increasing in the last 10 years, 5 years, 2 years, even 1 year. And so council has increased their homestead exemption to the state allowed maximum. We spend a lot of time and energy out making sure people file for their homestead exemptions and know how to protest their property taxes. I know that's not at the heart of your question, but I want to make sure people know about that. Part of the reason that we have invested a lot in that effort is because we don't have enough housing supply, which is driving the cost up.
How many of them are Airbnbs? We have lots of houses on the market. The problem is not lack of housing. The problem is investment-owned housing.
We do have...
and how many of those along that corridor, those units that are built, how many of them are going to be turned into Airbnb? Has anybody thought about that? I mean, is the city thinking about that?
Yes, so we do have a city ordinance that's quite strict on where Airbnbs can be located. They can only be 12% of the block face, so that is enforced through DSD. But
they just need to go.
That's already being abused. Building adjustments will adjust it if there's more than, if they want more than one on a block, why is building adjustments doing?
So what we're working on in our proposal is to ensure that people are able to stay in their homes. A lot of NHSD's budget is devoted specifically to home repair. So for people who are living along the property line, we're making sure we're getting information out to them and continuing our work on both renters' rights education and property tax help campaigns. Another piece of the work that the Removing Barriers has keyed in on is one of our SHIP recommendations around property tax help. Y'all know that the Texas state legislature has been very active on this issue. Part of what we are hoping to do is look into things that are called circuit breakers, which basically mean once your property tax reaches a certain level or part of a ratio of your income, it can freeze. So it's not something that we're allowed to do today, but it is something that we're working with the state of Texas to hopefully get through in legislation.
And that ridership, that whoever it was that mentioned ridership, being mostly people that need to use it, that's key. So y'all should really take that to heart.
Absolutely. Part of the thing that concerns us is that right now when people are looking for affordable housing, they have to go further and further out and drive till they qualify, which means that maybe their housing costs are low, but their transportation costs go way up. So how can we use this as an opportunity to lower both costs by implementing it together? I'll give you your time.
It's great input for the board, Mary.
Thank you all for your presentation. As I was sitting here tonight, I think one of the biggest things that I kept hearing, and I hate to use this analogy, but it sounds a little bit like a Field of Dreams scenario. And I come from a very big city and moved here, and I worked in the unhousing department. And I haven't really seen a whole lot of education outside of these meetings, neighborhood conversations, actual, like, I've never seen anything, I'm sorry, but walking in neighborhoods. If this is supposed to be a success, it needs to start with action now, and that also means leadership needs to actually be riding the bus, walking the streets. I'm a biker. I don't see anything about bike lanes here. So consider that if you are wanting to make the kinds of change you're looking for. Please consider this as, I'm actually not the president of my neighborhood, and so I walk every day, every single day. And the only reason that my neighbors know me is because of that. If you actually want to make the kind of change, you should be the one riding the bus first.
Yes, we do. Did you want to talk about bike lanes or how we are currently partnering with VIA to make sure that we have the bike infrastructure where appropriate, but I'll let Marie and Isaac talk about it.
Yeah, really quickly in the department, I think all of us take the bus or bike. I know that I bike to the San Pedro station next to the auto parts store, and then I take it downtown, and then that's where I go to work, and then I take it back up. Sometimes I just bike all the way on McCullough back home, but yeah, all of us bike and take the bus frequently. In terms of the connection with the framework, as I said, the 5 principles, one of them is multimodal connectivity. Within the watershed analysis, that's what we're looking at, is how do we connect the bike lanes along San Pedro and along the Silver Line. And then our department's also working on the bike network plan. I'll pass it to Isaac. You want to talk a little bit more about it?
Sure. So one of the things that we have kind of addressed during the bike network plan is we understand that due to the ART being built, there is right-of-way restrictions that we can't really be built any kind of bike facilities per se along the ART right-of-way. But what we can do is that we can provide proper connections to either the stations themselves or provide parallel connections along San Pedro. So.
And in some areas, they're actually shared use paths, or they are a bike lane that is right behind the lane. So yes, there is going to be some bike facilities tied into their improvements.
I will just say, if anybody's never ridden a bike next to a bus, it's one of the more frightening moments of your life.
That's why a big part of it is a shared use path, so you're off the road.
I guess I should start by saying, William Long, I should start by saying I've seen some of your staff on bikes even before you were in your role. Jillian Harris lived in the Monte Vista area, and I would see her riding her bike near St. Anthony High School.
We can't hear you, sir.
Oh, speak closer. to the
Thank
mic.
you.
Can't understand you either.
I appreciate it. Okay, so what I'm saying is I've seen their staff on bikes, walking dogs, and previous staff as well. So I represent my friends, family, and neighbors in the Alta Vista and Harmony Hills neighborhoods. It's unfortunate that both neighborhood associations have taken the stances they have. Most of us don't agree with them or even attend their meetings. We have owned homes 40 plus years in one and 50 plus years in the other, and we haven't attended more than one meeting in each. So that's our outlook on their opinion. We also own within our family 5 properties within Alta Vista within 2 blocks of San Pedro. We all support the ART project. We all support the TOD policy. And I'm probably the only one in my family that rides San Pedro, but there are bikes on San Pedro, not just crossing it. So if and when those are able to be accommodated after VIA's project, we would definitely appreciate that, especially north of Bassett.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we really appreciate the comments. I know we were taking a lot of them down. I don't know if everybody saw Alfonso over here doing his little shorthand. We wanted to let you know the boards are out back, right in the foyer area back here. We would appreciate if you just take a stop, look at it, answer some of the questions for us, help us develop this. Because this is it's what you will need and it's what we will need, and we want to collaborate, as I said at the beginning.
There should be Post-it notes and stickers, so that way we can make sure that we get your input and comments.